Nice.
Boo.
Boo! All right, I'm fine.
No.
We're still going to boo you, but come back.
Right on. Well, at least I'm prepared. Thank you, folks. All right, so thumbs up in chat. Am I audible? Excellent. You may, if you looked at the calendar ahead of time, you may notice that this is a different title than the title that I originally came up with for this talk, because I went through a few different iterations on. Yes.
They can't hear you unless you stand.
Right, and so I'll just carry it because I'm a walker.
They won't be able to see you either.
Sorry.
Hold on, just give them a little bit of mic for a second, and they can freeze frame on that.
You want to work the camera?
There you go.
So, oh God. So I went through a few different iterations on this talk because I couldn't really decide which angle I wanted to take. I was originally thinking that I would teach you how to play D&D, and then I decided, no, once you've decided to learn a thing, or once you've decided that you're interested in a thing, that's when you actually go about learning it yourself. We're all nerds here. That's what we do. We come up with something that we want to do or are interested in, and then we go and figure out how to do it. So I think that first step is the more critical step. What I want to do is convince you that you should include role-playing games in your life, and that your life will benefit from it. And so what I want to start with is a conversation about imagination. And not the imagination of inventiveness, which is what I think Einstein's talking about here, but the imagination of self. The imagination of seeing yourself in an impossible place, doing impossible things. Because when you can do that, that is when you are able to come about the imagination of inventiveness. When you see yourself in an impossible place doing impossible things, you start coming up with impossible ideas for solving impossible problems and overcoming impossible hurdles. And that then is the kind of life improvement that we want to search for, no matter what vein we go down. When you were a child, your imagination was perfect. You could pick up a stick, and suddenly it was a sword, or a polearm, or a monarch's scepter, or a wizard's staff, and you could see that in your head, and you would take action, or a lightsaber. And you could look at the floor and see lava, and know you had to jump over it. Or you knew that while walking down the sidewalk, if you stepped on the cracks, you'd break your mother's back. These are things that you knew. And then you forgot them over time, because what happened? You grew up. And it's impossible to say that without a little bit of tragedy in the tone of voice. Well, growing up tends to happen. Happens to the best of us. But my goal then, if anything, is to convince you to find that place again. To see the floor as lava, and to see the stick as a sword. So to get there, I need to talk about role-playing games, but not this kind of role-playing game. Many of us in here are video gamers. And while I adore Final Fantasy, this is Final Fantasy VI, there's my sweetheart Terra in the background. While I love the Final Fantasy series and I love video games, this is not actually a role-playing game. Let's take those words apart. You're not playing a role when you do this. You're given an algorithm. You're given pretty pictures. You are handed the state of the world and a very limited and concrete and immutable set of things that you can do to that world. Well, do you want to attack it with a spear, or do you want to throw a fireball at it? Well, I want to jump on top and grab its collar and try to wrestle it to the ground. No, you can't do that. The programmers didn't think of that. So this is not really a role-playing game because you don't have the freedom to play that role and take the actions that you want to take. You are not influencing the world. The world is sandboxing you. So I'm talking about this kind of role-playing game, where instead of a solo player sitting on a couch consuming pretty pictures and making decisions based on them. You are one of a group of friends or strangers, and you're sitting around a table interacting, socializing, having conflict, resolving conflict, and telling a story together. That one in the back is the DM, the dungeon master. I've never really been comfortable with that term, partly because it has shades of BDSM, partly because it has this implication that this is the big bad guy at the end, the dungeon master, the final boss, the antagonist of the rest of the group. That's not their role at all. They're the referee. They are the cold and calculating universe. They set up the sandbox and then decide when to break it down for you. So that when you decide, I want to jump on that creature's back and try to wrestle it to the ground, they figure out how to get to yes. They figure out how to help you tell that story so that you can jump on top. And maybe with a hint of chance, maybe you fall off. Maybe it wrestles you to the ground instead and bites off your arm. Who knows? That's the storytelling process. We can't talk about role-playing games like this, though, without talking about the breadth of the stories that can be told. I'm going to be talking primarily about Dungeons & Dragons, because that's my favorite setting. I love the high fantasy setting, the Tolkien-esque setting of orcs and swordsmen and gnomes and bards and druids. But maybe you don't. Maybe you prefer space opera. Maybe you prefer hard science fiction like The Martian. Maybe you prefer true crime or eldritch horror like Cthulhu and Azathoth. Pick a fictional genre, and I guarantee you that there is both a gaming system and a community of people interested in telling those stories with you, interested in playing that game with you in the setting that you like. But we also can't talk about role-playing without talking about where it comes from, this place of storytelling, improvisational theater, improvisational comedy. Because we have to think when we are telling stories together about what makes storytelling good and fun. So let's first back up and talk about improvisational theater and improvisational comedy, where you and perhaps a troupe are up on a stage performing for an audience. Where, as a member of this troupe, you have to let go of your agenda. It's not just your story to tell. You're telling it together. And that means that sometimes you have to sit back, be quiet, and listen to whoever is currently on the floor speaking, to whoever is contributing their piece of the story, so that when they are done, you can build on it. You can add in your piece to complement theirs. This is called the yes and in improv. Accept what's on the table. Accept the story as it is so far and as it has been told by the people before you, and add your piece. Respect them, and then expect them to respect you back by yes-anding you back, by coming back and taking what you've contributed and building on their own piece of the story. And by doing that, you can't be wrong, because everything that feels suddenly out of place, everything that you say, you don't have to redact it. You're telling a story. There's no wall to hit. You just add more. You patch over it and you keep moving. You can't be wrong. Anything that feels out of place becomes one of Bob Ross's happy little accidents. And you just keep on rolling. The show must go on. And at the end of the day, though, when you are standing up on a stage and you have this troupe that you're performing with, part of making yourself look good is building up others. This is one of those life lessons that every one of those like Rich Dad, Poor Dad style, self-help videotape and cassette and book series will tell you, is to build up yourself, to make yourself look good, make those people around you look good. Herd immunity to being boring. And so you make your other folks look good and expect them to do the same back to you. And this leads to some very real world benefits for you. Things that you can take away, things that stick with you, like learning to be flexible and go with the flow, learning how to listen, and how to pick out the details of somebody else's contribution to the story that are relevant to your own, so that you can figure out how to build upon what they've said, how to be constructive instead of saying no, instead of tearing down what they've said. And especially in the working world where we are, making your colleagues looks good makes the company looks good, makes you look good. I'm not going to go so far as to say something like, is what you're doing best for the company, but is what you're doing best for you? Because if you are helping to be constructive and taking part in telling a story with your colleagues that makes them look like they did the right thing, or at least backs them up if they didn't, then you are by extension becoming a good and righteous person. You are helping. The one thing that I would redact from the previous slide, though, is that don't try to apply the you can't be wrong part in the working world. You're going to have a bad time. But the rest of these are real life lessons that you can take away. That said, I do have a couple of beefs with improvisational theater and improvisational comedy. Even just seeing a picture like this makes me sweat bullets. Because I can't imagine being up on that stage, relying on a troupe of people, establishing that level of trust with other people to help make me look good while I'm trying to help them look good, while I'm trying to build on the story and be a good listener and go with the flow. Even after teaching 75 boot camps for BNR, I still have nerves of fire when I'm in front of a large group. Even right now, I'm terrified of kind of fucking this up. And so the thought of performing not just for myself and my closest friends, but performing for complete strangers adds a completely different dynamic, which, while valuable, is something that I personally am way less invested in spending my time doing. The other problem of improvisational theater and comedy is that it's not terribly frequent, right? It's not... only the most dedicated meet up every couple of weeks to do more practice. And it's not something that any of us in the working world, I think, are likely to do, except for those most dedicated to the craft of performance art like this. So what I want to do is take these two ends, not even ends of a spectrum, but corners of the spider graph of role-playing games like Final Fantasy, where you're in a complete sandbox, and improvisational theater, where there are no limits and you can't be wrong. And I would like to combine these two and find that middle ground, that middle place, where you have this ability to tell a story together and to build on each other's story, but instead of being completely unlimited, where you freeze in the face of all of the infinite options of things that you could say and do next, you at least have a little bit of context in an internally consistent world. Because you've agreed with the DM and the other players upon the setting for your story. Maybe it's high fantasy and Tolkien-esque, so you think, okay, what can I expect? I can expect orcs and elves, and I can expect plate armor and chainmail and swords and staves and fireballs. Cool. That gives me some ideas, some starting points for the actions that I might want to take. But unlike a game like Final Fantasy, there's the freedom to jump on the creature's back. And also, unlike improvisational theater, where you are relying completely on peers to help feed you back and to help you tell that story, you instead have the additional comfort of a mediator. Somebody playing the role of the cold and calculating universe, not the antagonist. Yes, they do say the words that the antagonist would say. And yes, they do come up with who those antagonists will be that you will have to face while telling your heroic story. But the DM is not playing against the characters. The DM plays the role of providing the sketch in which you draw your characters. And then finally, by being your own audience, not having to worry about being on the spot and performing for others, it becomes a little bit like a party. Well, literally in a sense of a party of adventurers, but also you're just hanging out, shooting the shit with friends, and telling each other's stories and not worrying about being judged by people you don't know out there. Then finally, this becomes a naturally more frequent thing by being specifically fun, because this continuous story keeps you invested. Maybe there's even a cliffhanger. Maybe you all got to the demon's castle at the end of the last session. You want to come back in about a week or 2 or 3 or 4, some short duration of time so you can find out what happens next and help to decide what happens next. I don't know, are you going to attack it with your sword? Are you going to climb up to the top of the castle and try to break in a window? What are you going to do? So these real world lessons that you take away are valuable both with improvisational theater and comedy and with actual role-playing games. Teamwork, quick thinking under pressure, resourcefulness, conflict resolution. These are real things. But it is practice that makes perfect. And I really enjoyed the one-shot improv class that I took out on the front lawn when, I've suddenly forgotten his name, came over and helped us go through a number of exercises. But that was a one-shot thing. I'm not continuing to practice that all the time. I don't have a group that I meet with to do that every other week so that I can figure out how to respond to certain situations without thinking about it, without having to sit and squat and decide what action to take. So now we're going to do a little bit of an experiment. And I apologize, remote folks, I am going to be walking outside of the frame of the camera, but I have this with me. And what I'm going to do is, rather than teach you the actual full-on mechanics of Dungeons and Dragons, we're going to use an extremely simplified system where we do have the storytelling component and we do have the chance component of the dice to tell us a very short story together. There are a small handful of mechanics that I do need to explain up front, though. The context, the rules by which the story is told. This is the standard set of polyhedral dice that are used in a game like this, focusing on the big one in the middle, the D20, the 20-sided die. Rolling a 1 is very, very bad. Rolling a 20 is very, very good. And then you have a gradient in between. So when you decide to jump on the big creature's back, we don't just flip a coin to see if you decide. That's boring. That takes all of it out of your hands except for the impetus. No, we have a gradient of the story from a 1 to a 20 that helps the DM to figure out, how does the animal react? And do you overshoot? Do you land on top perfectly, or do you accidentally injure your hand on one of the spikes on the creature's collar? So when I walk around the room in a moment, I'm going to describe a piece of a scenario to you, and then I want you to tell me what you're going to do in response, what action you'd like to take, or verbalize it back to me. In character, say back to me what you would say to the person or creature if you think that that's appropriate. And then I'm going to maybe, not always, I'm going to maybe say, okay, so you're trying to haggle with the merchant, and I hear what you're saying. The merchant's a little bit on the edge about whether to lower the price in response to what you just said. And I might say, okay, then roll a charisma check. Roll the D20. Add in this modifier that is based on who you are. And then that helps to decide what the merchant's response is going to be. That's part of the storytelling. That's the chance aspect of it. So what we have here is a super, super simplistic character sheet for a role-playing game like this. A character description and the core stats. Because you, a dwarven paladin, sitting in a tavern after a long day's adventuring, reeking of body odor inside of your plate mail armor, with your mace sitting by your side, are enjoying a fine mug of the house ale. Well, mead in this case. And you are sitting with your fellow adventurers, but to continue to help set that stage, your character in particular, being a stout dwarf, a paladin who has seen the field of battle, you're pretty strong by now. Like, you've got those big ripped muscles for being able to swing around that mace, and maybe even a warhammer if it comes to it. But because of your plate armor, you can't move super fast. You can take a hit, though. That's what the Constitution is for. You can take a hit. You didn't join the mercenary squad. You didn't become a paladin because you're book smart. You did it because you had a specific set of skills, murdering the bad guy. And so you're not hyper intelligent, but you've seen some stuff. You've got a little bit of street wisdom in you. But that scar down your face and your constant body odor because of how constricting this armor is makes you not terribly charismatic. So if we were sitting down to start a new campaign, you would be the one coming up with these numbers based on some dice rolls and also some decisions that you make to help you tell the story that you want to tell. Do you want to be a dwarf, or do you want to be a half-orc or a human or a gnome? Do you want to be a paladin or a fighter or a spellcaster of some kind, a sorcerer or a wizard? And then you come up with your backstory. Were you in the King's Guard? Or were you a conscripted militia? And then those decisions about your backstory help you to decide which numbers should be high and which numbers should be low. And eventually, they are required to balance in certain ways that I'm not going to go into right now. But these numbers reflect the character that you want to be in the setting that's been established. So you're sitting in this tavern, and you, boop. Wait for it. Anybody played World of Warcraft? Yeah, I see a couple of hands. Don't be shy. So you're sitting in this tavern, enjoying a mug of the house mead, along with a small selection of your adventuring party. And while you're sitting there just really lost in thoughts from the battle earlier today, where you all did vanquish one of the legion heads of the Devil King's army. I'm making this up as I go. Of the Legion Kings, of the Devil King's army, you suddenly hear a rustling, and somebody behind you stands up, scooches their big, heavy oaken chair out of the way, and they are angry. They turn around, they grab your chair, they turn you around, and they say, yeah, I'm putting you on the spot. Damn it. And they say, "What'd you say about my mother?"
Okay. Nothing at all. I swear I wasn't even talking.
Sounded to me like you called her a lich.
Man, I wasn't saying a word. I was sitting here enjoying my ale.
Roll a charisma check for me.
With that or with this?
Yeah, just either one's fine.
No, I like the big one.
He rolled a 4. So this big half-orc barbarian looks around and he says, "Boys, what do you think?" He looks back and he eyes you. And while he's eyeing you, you can tell he's sizing you up. And let's see, he wants so badly to just brawl right now. Like, you just definitely did not convince him that you said nothing about his mother. You can have one more chance.
Apparently it's a really funny joke about your mom.
I said nothing of your mother.
Give me one more charisma check. rolled a 10. So that number is kind of in the middle, right? And that's where the DM, the dungeon master, being the cold and calculating universe, has to take several factors into account. Has to decide on the spot when they say, give me a charisma check or an intelligence check or a strength check. That's when they say, or they in their head come up with a number, the target that you have to hit to just get over the edge of success. Because there is that pseudo gradient of success from 1 to 20, where 1 almost always means a hilarious failure, and 20 almost always means an epic success. But depending on the context, depending on the story you're telling, that might not actually be the case. What if you're trying to do something that ought to be super easy? Or what if you're trying to do something that has been established is going to be very hard? Then in some cases, a 5 might mean success, just getting over the edge from failure to success, and sometimes it might be 15. Sometimes it might be 20, meaning that you have to rely on your modifier to get you over the edge. And so these numbers are being either have already been written down in the DM's plan for their part of the story, or these numbers are being made up on the spot if the DM didn't plan for you to jump on the creature's back. But in either case, you have a target that you have to hit. Okay, so the 10 wasn't enough. I'm sorry. So this guy is mad.
Was the 2 enough? Was the 2 enough?
Was the 2? No. So this guy is mad, and he is convinced that you just slighted his beloved mother back home in his hometown, who right now is taking care of his younger siblings while he's out trying to make money as a mercenary to send back home to his family. Right? Whatever. But, okay, so this creature, this half-orc, bares his teeth, and you can see one is kind of chipped off, and you see a little bit of the age lines show up on his face as he growls into your face. And then he stands back up again and kicks your chair out from under you. 20. So he kicks your chair out from under you, and you immediately tumble to the floor. Your ale is all over you. Now you smell like BO and ale, and that's just never a good combination. So what are you going to do about this? You're lying on the floor. He's just kicked your chair out from under you. What would you like to do?
Another round.
Well, I would probably say, whoa. And then, I think the fight is on.
I know Kung Fu.
Yeah.
I think the fight is on. I'm on the floor, so I'd do something kind of dirty pool and probably swing a mace or something at his crotch.
Okay, so your mace is right there on your hip, and so you try to grab it off your hip and whah, and swing it up right in between his legs. Give me a dexterity check.
Come on.
Because this isn't just about beating down a natural one.
What is it? Natural 1?
Natural one. This couldn't be going worse. So your mace was actually kind of like partially caught under one of the legs of the chair that had fallen over. So as you grab it and try to swing it up, you lose your grip on it, and it just goes flying across the room. And you're holding out your hand, and you're looking up at him, and he looks down at you, ready to try to stomp. Hey, remote folks, who's got a D20? Can they speak?
Can you ask Siri?
Yeah.
Does that work?
Steph says he has one.
Okay.
Of course he does.
Always have when you're talking.
Okay. So then, he kicked away your chair. You fell over with ale all over you, with mead all over you. You tried to hit him with your mace. You ended up throwing it across the room. You hear a cat scream somewhere, and then he's standing over you, getting ready to just stomp the ever-loving crap out of you. What's the next step, remote person?
It's actually step.
Oh, it is Step. Step, what are you going to do?
Well, we can't.
Whoever chats back, or whoever's watching chat, read it out to us.
Next step.
What's your next move?
I'm going to.
He's going to kick his knees out.
I'm going to kick his knees out. Okay. Right on. Step, give me a strength check. I'm trusting you to report the right roll. Honor system here.
You got a 21. Come on, Steph. How long does it take?
17.
17. Okay, and what?
13 plus 4.
Right, sure. Okay. So that is enough. So while lying on the floor, you grunt and you just kick his knee, bends back the other way. He falls over, lands next to you just in time for
the mace to go flying down out of the sky.
for the window to break. And one of these comes flying into the room. And just when you thought you were in the middle of a fight that was a standard bar brawl that you grew up doing, brawling with people in bars before you could even drink, this thing flies into the room. It's about that size. So it's got a body the size of a chicken. It's got these massive pincers on it, and it's got this proboscis out here that it's going to try to run you through like a sword. Like a fencing, what is that called? The Epi? EpiPen? No. So this thing flies into the room. Right. So this thing flies into the room, and suddenly you're in a combat encounter. So there are two parts to most of these games, or two different parts of the storytelling experience. There's just the base narrative of conversing with non-player characters, like the big brute who turned around. But then there's also the combat encounters, which is where you get to go kill shit. And so this thing flies into the room, and everybody is shocked. It makes for the bartender behind the bar, who backs up against the wall. And you've got some choices to make. Luke, what are you going to do?
Regarding this four-winged creature?
Yeah, so you have...
You can run.
So at your disposal... So among the infinite myriad things that you could do in this situation, if you choose to use your... Oh, I accidentally changed it to a warhammer. If you decide to use your mace, which is not with you anymore, right? It's on the other side of the room now. So you have a crossbow with you, which you could try to use, or come up with something else.
You can cut yourself.
That is a viable option.
So I don't have no warhammer.
Pretty low DC.
Don't have a warhammer.
Okay.
It was a mace. I got the slide wrong, and then it got thrown across the room.
I'll make it PR.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
I'm gonna try to hit one of his four wings with a crossbow.
Okay, go
And
ahead.
immobilize
And so now that we are in combat, it's not just those core stat checks. You're performing an attack with a particular type of weapon. So here, the modifier with using your crossbow is +2. So go ahead and roll the d20. 2. Damn it. +2 for 4.
Tried.
Doesn't work out. So you fire off your crossbow bolt. It goes wide, clatters on the floor behind.
Make sure you get the mic next time.
Oh, I thought I had it held out. Sorry.
Just make sure.
So the crossbow bolt goes wide, clatters in, breaks a couple of bottles behind the bar, and now the bartender's scared of two things, because he just saw this bolt go whizzing past his face and whizzing past this sturge, this large creature that's flying in and menacing him. We'll go with one more round. The bartender tries to back away a little bit more, and he grabs a bottle, smashes it on a table, and tries to take a swing at the sturge. He rolls a 10, and this is where the DM just has to make shit up. Using previous experience, using stuff that they've read in guides and online. And so that 10 was enough. Gets a good stab into the belly of this creature, and the creature changes its mind. It's so, wrong target, it backs up and starts flying off towards you, and we're going to have one more round. D. So this thing is now headed straight for you.
That dice is terrible.
You can use the crossbow, but also you can use your imagination to decide on some other course of action if you'd like.
How many people are around me?
So there's the guy still lying on the ground from where you kicked out his knee. He's just rolling in pain. And then the rest of your adventuring party have now stood up, but none of them have had a chance yet to take any action. They are all within about 5 to 6 feet of you. And then farther away than that, the tavern has a sparse maybe 10 people.
Okay.
But there's a cat somewhere that got hit by your mace.
So a really angry cat.
Yeah, and a really angry cat. Yeah.
I say if he hit him with a bottle full of liquor, you should hit that thing with a torch.
Yeah.
Set it on fire,
Is there
Okay.
fire nearby?
There is a burning brazier in the corner because it's wintertime.
Okay.
And I'd say, yeah, okay, so you want to go and light
Make
a
for
torch?
the torch.
Okay, so you go, and this is not a difficult thing to do, to walk over to a brazier and dip a torch into it. We'll say that was in your inventory. We'd normally have to check your character sheet, but that's fine. But we'll say that you had a torch.
3 braziers in her inventory.
3 braziers. So you light the torch in the brazier, and what are you going to do with it?
Am I
You're about 15 feet
15 feet?
from the sturge, hovering in the air at about head height.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to throw this guy.
You're gonna throw it at him. Okay. So for that, we are gonna go ahead and just make a dexterity check then, because this is like lobbing a ball. Your dexterity was +1, I think. So go ahead and roll.
Come on.
4. +1, 5. Not gonna do it. So, yeah, dex was +1. Okay. This is the worst adventure, but it's the best adventure because we're adventuring together, right? Oh. But so the torch goes wide, hits the wall where that row of bottles was, that the crossbow bolt it splattered all this liquor across the wall. Now the tavern's on fire and burns down the end. So now, at some level, some of this decision making came a little bit naturally. Even though these were impossible situations, even though this was a fantasy world that some of which I kind of sketched out in advance and the rest of which we made up together on the spot with the help of some dice. But Jacques from As You Like It said it best, though. You had some of these skills come naturally to you because, how does it go? All the world's a stage, all the men and women merely players, right? They have their entrances and their exits, and in their time play many parts. All the time, we are constantly playing different roles IRL. All the time, we are constantly wearing different hats, and all the time, if you really let that sink in, all the time, we are...
No, you have to go back. Go back. That was the worst.
And all the time, if you... we are wearing different hats, and we are making decisions, with different contexts. We go home and we talk to our family, and that's one version of us, one persona. Then we come into the office and we talk to our colleagues. That's a different persona. And then we talk to our clients, and that's yet another one. So what we really need is the ability to get back into that place and get practice solving impossible problems in impossible situations so that when we adopt these boring personae in the real world, I know, right? When we adopt these mundane, non-magical personae, these muggle personae, then we can take lessons from the practice that we've had up here and in there. I encourage you to go and find a game of your own. I'm running a few, eventually those will wrap up and I'll start a couple others, but there's the Atlanta Gamers Guild. that you can go to on meetup.com, and that's kind of like a looking for group scenario where there are constantly people starting games with different scenarios set in the Cthulhu mythos versus Dungeons and Dragons versus several others. So you can go there and you can find people with similar fiction interests to yours and find a game to just hop into. If you're remote, or if you're remoter than remote, like if you don't have that kind of a community right near you, online games are possible. I run one periodically. I have a game that I run with people in 4 different time zones. Joseph over there in Central, and then folks in Germany and London. And so Roll20.net is an online meetup that provides the tools, the online dice rolling, and the reference material to be able to run an entirely online game and to connect players up. And then there's also local comics and games shops, many of which have regular games going on, or even if they are full up, can recommend people looking for groups for you. How does it go? Getting back into that place and being able to see the floor as lava and being able to see the stick as a sword. When I was a child, that's the quote, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I thought like a child. And then on the road to adulthood, I packed away childish things, but when I got there, I unpacked most of them. And I try to embrace my immaturity most of the time by making Wookiee noises, by giving random hugs to people. And that's the persona that I try to take away from all of this, both from practice playing games with other people, but also real-world experience and improv type stuff. But I can't encourage you enough to decide to get that practice yourself and to go and find a game and get into it and see that floor as lava. That's all I've got. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions. I've got some minis up here in case anybody wants to come up and see what game board minis might look like if you are in fact playing on a table. And I also have other reference materials to share. But that's what I've got. Any thoughts, questions, or concerns?
So in real life, do you consider yourself a dwarf paladin that is not smelly and not wearing plate armor and is working on the charisma and all that kind of stuff?
I think I'm a bard.
You're a bard.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, I think that in an adventuring party, I would be the one that randomly breaks into song, partly with the intention of embarrassing my peers, and partly, huh? Okay, fine. Mostly with the intention of embarrassing my peers.
The old bard, weird Mikey Yankovic.
Yeah, weird Mikey Yankovic. I like it.
Dice jail.
Say what now?
Dice jail.
Dice jail. Yeah, bad rolls. Bad rolls. Very bad rolls. Yeah, D.
What?
Oh, Catchbox. Right on.
Yeah. What is the strangest or a unique setting for a tabletop game or role-playing game that you've seen?
The strangest or most unique? Oh, goodness. I've seen zombie apocalypse. I've seen... I think some of the weirder ones are alternative history, because they tend to get into uncanny valley. When you're playing a tabletop game as people playing on a field of a battle that actually already took place, then there's a certain part of us as humans that trends towards following what we know to already be history. But then we also encourage ourselves to break free of that and tell our own story. And so you end up riding that tangential line right along it. And it starts to muddle with your actual memory of what the history book says happened. So that's what I've got there.
In other words, Fox News.
Not going to go there. Matt.
Do you prefer, I guess you might have to do the right distinction, but do you prefer role-playing to DMing?
As an absolute, I don't know that I could say that I prefer one over the other all the time, because they are very different modes to be in. Because as the role player, you have, the question was, do I prefer being a player, role-playing, to being the DM? Because in the two games that I'm involved with right now, I'm the DM of both of them. And I do really enjoy the creativity that comes with drawing the battle maps and inventing the world and coming up with the large overarching political alliances between kingdoms and whatnot that provide the context for the players to play in. Like, that just really scratches an itch for me. Being able to sit down, just at home with my iPad and either draw stuff out on a map or come up with ideas and take notes. But I have greater concerns. Like, while DMing, I'm constantly worried, are the players having fun? Is this something that the players are going to actually enjoy getting involved in, or am I scratching that itch too much? Or am I just getting into my own head and building a world that the players can't really enjoy or get into? And so being a DM is a little bit more of the improvisational performing for others. Whereas being a role player, you are up the player and the audience, and so you get to consume the template that the DM has given you, and you have the freedom to not have to invent things except for your own actions and responses to what happens in the world, which is comforting. It lets you sit back and enjoy it a little bit more without the pressure of performing. So it depends on which mode I'm in. Do you prefer comedy or horror? Well, it depends on the evening. Any other thoughts or questions? Anything from the chat? Amanda, go ahead.
I thought GM, as in Game Master, was used more commonly these days than DM. It has less of an appeal to it.
Right.
When you're GMing, you don't have to keep whips on the side.
This is absolutely true. So the comment was, is GMing, game mastering, as opposed to DMing, dungeon mastering, a more common more common way to say it? And based on the friends and circles that I've played in, I think it actually is quasi-regional. I've definitely run into folks that insist, like, wait, what did you call it, a game master? And both ways. And I originally called it game mastering until I started watching a show online where people play Dungeons and Dragons, and they call it DMing, and so I adopted that. But I'm not really sure globally which one is more common. But I do agree that GMing is a little bit more politically correct, perhaps, or a little bit more benign.
As long as you can enunciate game.
Game. That's right. Important. Full circle. Anybody else? I had gotten, or I had sent out late last year an email asking for people to express interest or not in getting involved in a D&D one-shot for the Dungeon Master, or excuse me, for the Dungeons and Dragons Curious. For where a one-shot is like right. We're not going to escape it now. Where the one shot is a single engagement of about 3 to 4 hours. The story begins and ends in that time. So you're not committing yourself to, an every other week game for months until some large epic story gets told. And don't worry, for those of you that had replied, because I think I got about 10 replies or so, enough to run 2 separate games. I'm still on the lookout, A, for a time that I'm in town, and B, for story components to use to build that one shot. So they are still going to happen. They will probably happen on 2 separate dates. And if you had responded in the affirmative, feel free to hang out in a little bit, and I'll go ahead and start the process of getting you the reference materials that you might want to look at to learn a little bit about the world. Cool? Anything else in chat? Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.